So, ladies and gentlemen, today on Sports File, we're going to take a very affectionate look and a very, in my case, a personal look at someone who I consider the best sports broadcaster in Canadian history. Now, for those who are under the age of 40, maybe your uncle or your older relatives and your mom or dad would tell you about this guy, and you say, what are you talking about? This Danny Gallivan guy. Well, Danny Gallivan meant so much to us as journalists in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. You might as well call him now the great-grandfather of media, all media in Canada. Now, Danny Gallivan was much more than a great athlete during his early life. He redesigned the way hockey was covered in a visual and audio standpoint, primarily for Hockey Night in Canada and specifically the Montreal Canadiens as their English language voice. Now, René Lecavalier was just as good for the French side of the CBC, but Danny had sort of that maritime charm and quality to his voice that only he could make successful, besides Bob Cole, of course. But Danny Gallivan, my God, what a legend. So we're going to talk a little bit about his early career as an athlete and as a journalist and his time with Hockey Night in Canada. You couldn't give enough hours of the day to Danny Gallivan, so we're just going to cover the highlights for the uninitiated. Now, Danny was born April 11th, 1917 in the great Nova Scotia hardworking city of Sydney. Gallivan was an avid athlete as a youth, and he was basically one of the best pitchers to come out of the Sydney region in the late 1930s, and he helped the St. Teresa Parish squad from the community win the Maritime Intermediate Baseball Championship in 1937, which is ironically the same division I competed in as a baseball player in the early 1980s up in Baldoon. So I always wondered where all the talented baseball players motivated us in the modern generation, and it was in the late 1930s. Now, in the championship game of that series, he had the victory against the Pugwash Maple Leafs in the best of three, and where he struck out 11 and had one of the best games ever in Nova Scotia history. Now, by 1938, Gallivan was invited to a New York Giants training camp as a power pitcher, because the Giants were, always recruiting in Canada, Quebec, and New Brunswick specifically for young players to augment their farm system. But Gallivan, it was not fully known, but was passed on to the Giants management at an early arm injury that ended his thoughts in a major league career. And Gallivan had talked about this a few times. He said, that maybe was the biggest thing to motivate him to get into radio, because everybody said, you're a great player, but why don't you try radio? You have a great voice. Now, Gallivan officially began his broadcasting career in Antigonish while attending St. FX, and at St. FX he had a great collegiate career, and eventually taught high school algebra and Latin in Antigonish following graduation, and also served time in the Canadian Army. So he was building his personality through his contacts and different people, which really aided his career as an announcer. Now, he comes from a very hard-working family. In the summers, Gallivan worked in the blast furnace department of the Dosco steel plant, where his father had worked for actually a grand total of 58 years. And his return to Antigonish after his service in the Army kind of solidified what became the most decorated media career in Canadian history. Now, at the time, CJFX was considered one of the best maritime radio stations for news, sports, and other coverage, and he really enjoyed his time there. And it gave him the level to improve his voice and improve his presentation. By 1946, actually, Gallivan was recruited to a radio station in Halifax, where he became sports director and was the beat reporter, the main journalist to cover the St. Mary's junior hockey team. Now here, again, CBC, at the time CBC had mostly radio. TV wasn't really in the mix, but he was recruited by Hockey Night in Canada while in Montreal when he was broadcasting a junior hockey game between Halifax and Montreal, and he started his radio announcing career with CBC in 1950. Now, CBC was making big decisions at the time because of the birth of the TV version of it in 1952, what they're going to do with the Saturday night games. And I think at the time my father had mentioned Some games are only 2 periods of the 3 or 1 of the 3. But Gallivan had the great voice that could be important and direct for the whole game. Eventually, CBC made a change to broadcast full games. Now, in '52, when Gallivan became the main announcer for the Habs, he was with the company on TV for 32 years. Now, in the last few years of the team, he also replaced Bill Hewitt for the Toronto Maple Leaf games, and he also announced some big moments in Toronto history, including Rick Guy's 50 goal a season. Now, according to unofficial reports, I put it at 2,100, but some other media reps have put it at 1,900. He called, again, more than 1,900 regular season and playoff games, including, get the 16 Stanley Cup finals for the Habs, which may endear him to people of all ages because his cannonading voice and his tremendous wordplay behind the mic made him just above and beyond. Now, can you imagine this? When you were a kid, if somebody read you a story, your mother or dad would act out the characters as best they could. But imagine this. Gallivan would take 40 players on the ice, on the bench, every moment and make it seem way bigger in life. We remember games that he called when Montreal played the California Golden Seals or Kansas City Scouts or some of the rotten teams. He could take any situation on the ice, no matter the quality of opposition. But these word choice, like scintillating, like stealing a puck, larcenous, an enormous save, like he improved the diction and understanding of children across Canada, and listening to a game for the adults there was something, for the kids there was something, and basically he was the greatest combination of Santa Claus and that great uncle that gives you $20 every Christmas. You're glad to see him. He was the best babysitter that Canada's never paid, because every Saturday night between 7 local time in Ontario and 9:30, the kids couldn't go to bed until the game was done, and Gallivan had everybody at the TV or on the couch watching every move and every sound he made. Now, I think it sums up his whole career. In the history of the Montreal Canadiens, there's 5 games that stand out in history. 1971 against Boston, Game 2 in the opening round series. 1976 against the Flyers when he won 4 straight. This is for the Stanley Cup. 1975 when he played Red Army. 1979 when he bet Boston at famous Game 7 in the semifinals, and a few of the initial Nordique Montreal games that they called. Imagine this: the greatest hockey game allegedly in the history of the sport is the 1975 Red Army Montreal game, and he called that. And he took the hockey to such a level. Not only the greatest game of all time was played, the greatest announcer of all time. It's like, if you win the lottery, you get millions and millions of dollars, but Danny Gallivan was money every time he called. He changed the way people looked at hockey. He changed the way people looked at maritime journalists. And in my case, I would not be a journalist were it not for Danny Gallivan and other of his quality paving the way to take maritime reporters seriously. You took it seriously from a print standpoint, but from an announcing standpoint, it all starts with Danny Gallivan, Peter Maher in Campbellton, Ina Hanneman Singh for CBC, not a sports announcer, but I know he was influenced there, our New Brunswick member of the National. There's thousands and thousands of journalists on the Maritimes. They owe everything to Danny Gallivan. Now, the reason why he quit, there was different reasons, but according to the published reports, he had to retire after the 84 NHL playoffs when, I guess, a severe illness, which we haven't talked about publicly what caused it, and it rendered him blind in one eye. And to a lot of people that knew him, they said, well, if he couldn't do anything full force, he wasn't going to do it. Now, his biggest legacy besides his great career is that he was a big promoter for people to support the fight against cystic fibrosis, and the Danny Gallivan Memorial Fund Bursary and the St. Francis Xavier University Awards are tied into his annual fundraising golf tournament. And if anybody's listening to this, cystic fibrosis is a very virulent disease. We always encourage people to seek out donations, to seek out information on the the ailment. And Danny was very close to his heart because Danny was always a person of the people. Now, you look at his resume, you look at his CV. I mean, I'm just going to tell you a few of the awards he's won. Now, this is, no one can ever compare to this, but I'll say it anyway. Everybody pretty well knows what I'm going to talk about. Now, he was the 1974 Actress Sportscaster of the Year Award, which is like the Oscar in Canada at the time. He's 1980, he was inducted into the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame. 84, he made it to the Hockey Hall of Fame. 85, he got an honorary doctorate from St. Francis Xavier. 89, inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. And in 1990, he got the Broadcast Recognition Award for my unofficial affiliation for journalists, the Atlantic Broadcasters Association. And 1991, made into the Canadian Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Now, 2015 was the latest inauguration. The new Maritime Sports Hall of Fame put him in. But you can give him every award in the book, you can give any type of recognition, but everybody had a personal relationships with the voice of Danny Gallivan. To me, he was Saturday nights of a time long gone. There was no internet, there was no, angriness of people screaming fake news and blah, 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 stop the immigrants. That's when Canada was really the Canada that I want to see come back. Imagine it was literally hockey night in Canada, and Danny Gallivan was the guy that could do it. As good as the other announcers, Jim Hughes and Don Whitman, they were very, very good, but you couldn't do very, very good in hockey night in Canada. You had to be beyond to beyond. And look at all the Montreal Canadiens legends that he announced. Serge Savard, the Spinorama, Lemaire, Lafleur, Schutt, Tumahavlich, the Pocket Rocket, Maurice Richard, John Beliveau. My God, the best players of all time announced by the best announcer of all time. And it's kind of ironic. This is. I almost got to a fist fight about Danny Gallivan, and I'm not telling tales out of school. I was in the Boston region one year, and I was listening to a Boston Red Sox game on the radio with a good announcer. It was not bad. And I happened over here while I said, Danny Gallivan, and somebody said, Danny Gallivan, who's that? I said, the greatest announcer of all time. And the guy said, well, greatest announcer is Howard Cosell. I said, Jesus Christ. I said, Howard Cosell is not an announcer. Howard Cosell is a product. Howard Cosell is a BS artist. I said, Danny Gallivan's a real deal. He said, how come all you Canadians, you think you're better than us? Well, I said, I don't know. Are you better than the best announcer of all time? I said, Danny Gallivan was still alive. He'd tell you, I am the voice of the Montreal Canadiens. Anyway, he wasn't too pleased, but if somebody's trying to beat you up over Danny Gallivan, I think they're misguided. Because anybody disagrees with me, drop yourself from the podcast, because Bob Cole is good. 9 out of 10, but Danny Gallivan's 11 out of 10. Said like Spinal Tap. So on this beautiful day, we wish you a happy Friday. Hopefully that freezing rain will let off a few days for people traveling. And just remember, if you have a chance, go on YouTube, but specifically the 1975 Red Army game, the 1976 Game 4 against the Flyers, and 1979 Game 7 where Lafleur scored with a few seconds left in the third period and Lambert won overtime. He took, again, everybody to a next level. And I still don't understand why Foster Hewitt was brought back for the 72 Summit Series to announce the TV. Big mistake, but again, maybe Danny Gallivan was so tired from announcing so many tough games in the regular season. Gallivan wouldn't do many preseason game announcing. It was all when the regular season started. From October to April, he was ready to go, or in some cases May later on. So Danny Gallivan, any Hall of Fame that becomes invented, he's got to go in, including the Best Guy Hall of Fame, because he was a cool dude. Everybody I know that talked to him, he was still alive. And it's kind of ironic, he died the same year that Montreal won its last cup in '93, and we all cried and all died a little bit that day when Danny died. So again, keep your stick in the ice. Hope this finds you well. Have a good day. Bye.